All right. The first book that we're going to talk about is legitimately the craziest fucking biography that I've ever read in my life. It's called The Patriarch. It's about the life and times of Joseph P. Kennedy, who's John F. Kennedy's father. I read this on your recommendation, Matt. This book is insane.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I think that when people talk about JFK in our modern society, and I think it's really basic and typical for people to hold him up as a paragon of virtue and cool stuff, because under JFK we went to the moon and so on, and he gives these
Well, I
rousing
mean,
speeches and was young.
we went to
and
the moon like after JFK, but he's the one that like spearheaded it. But yeah, yeah.
Okay, whatever. But like, so he's like popularly remembered for like all this kind of moonshot stuff.
Right.
And so, but people look at JFK and then don't consider the kind of backstory of JFK.
Right.
And I think that
And this,
Joseph Patrick
yeah.
Kennedy is the backstory of
This
JFK.
is very much the backstory of
Yeah.
JFK. Yeah, and I think we're just gonna try and like summarize this book because it's really long. It's like it's probably like a 40-hour read or something like that on Audible. But the story is fascinating all the way through. This guy lived probably like 5 different lives that would all be biographies in and of themselves. And just combining them into one person at such an interesting point of American history is awesome. So, all right, so the story starts as I've learned many Irish stories start, which is the potato famine, which is this like there's like a potato famine in like the 1850s or something in Ireland, and there's a mass wave of emigration like out of Ireland because of this. And all these Irish Catholics that are like dying in Ireland just settle into like Boston or like in that area. And it's kind of like the pogroms and Jews in like the 1890s. It's like a similar kind of inception story. And they all like set up their own repositories. And I think it was Joseph P. Kennedy's grandfather, who I think is also named Joseph P. Kennedy, which is really funny because it's Joseph P. Kennedy, and then his father is named Patrick Joseph Kennedy, and then he's named Joseph Patrick Kennedy. So it's like they just like trade names down a generation, which I find to be really funny. Um, yeah, so his like grandfather is like some laborer. He like works as like a cooper, making barrels and stuff, and then has a kid that becomes a politician in this just like Irish Catholic contingent of Boston, and then he has Joseph Patrick Kennedy.
But didn't they also set up a credit union?
His like parents.
Yeah, like a Irish Catholic credit union or
They
something.
might
like
have,
that?
yeah. I don't recall necessarily what they did, but they were famous. They were well known.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that stuck in my mind because driving around Bushwick, you see this Polish something credit union, and I always remember thinking, what the hell is that?
But it could be the start of like an inception story, like
Yeah.
the inception of like a really epic like family dynasty story.
And then he went to work for some bank, didn't he, originally in Boston?
Yeah, so he goes to Harvard because his dad was a politician, and Harvard's like all nepotism, as we're about to see in this story, because like all these kids are gonna go to Harvard. But yeah, he's like completely like a stud at Harvard. He's like a complete baller. So like he's apparently quite religious, and he doesn't drink. And it's like always amazing, like all these guys that you read from history that are like super religious and just like work all the time and don't do
Donald
drugs.
Trump doesn't drink.
Yeah, which is also interesting. And I think like John Rockefeller was also religious and didn't drink, and the Wright brothers didn't like. It's like all these like industrial like Catholic families that which is interesting. But he goes to Harvard. He's like captain of the baseball team, and like quite successful. Goes after Harvard to work at a bank as like a bank president, maybe I want to say.
Something like this.
Yeah, so he's on his Harvard career path with all his finance buddies, and World War One happens, which
he dodges.
right. Yeah. Yeah, so this is so whatever. The story is kind of normal so far. So he wants to not get drafted because he's right about the age where you would get drafted into World War One as America's entering. So apparently there was like this scheme that you could do back then, which is if you were working in some white collar job, but it was contributing to the war effort, you were not eligible for the draft. So he had this scheme with some of his Harvard buddies where like they were gonna like work as like finance people for like this plant that made like steel that they were using in warships.
Mm-hmm.
So like they're like, oh yeah, well we're helping the war effort by like manufacturing ships. So like we can't get drafted.
And organizing a baseball team, apparently.
Yeah, and like he like organized a baseball team for this like whatever Four River like steel manufacturing plant he was working at. So he does this for a little bit, and then decides after the war that he doesn't want to go back into finance. Or he does, but just doesn't want to work in the bank life. And I'm not exactly sure how this happens, but this is right in the 1920s or the beginning of the 1920s when motion pictures are starting to become a big thing. And he decides that he wants to get into the motion picture industry. I don't know. Do you remember like how that came about?
No.
Yeah. But anyway, so
Maybe it was bad, like if neither of us remember, it could have just been a part that they didn't really
Yeah.
know well in the book, so they just breezed over it. Because if there was a cool story about it, it probably would have stuck in our minds.
Sure, that makes sense. Um, but anyway, it's kind of interesting, right? So it's like I feel like all these people that are going to go on to do, insanely interesting things throughout history.
He financed it, right? Isn't
Yeah,
that how it started?
yeah, yeah. So, yeah, he's a financer for a movie
Yeah,
production
yeah,
company. But all these people that do really interesting things throughout history are always at like right at like a cusp of a technological change. So like, I think that I think he's going to be really interesting. 'Cause he's at the cusp of like multiple technological changes throughout his like career trajectory. But the first one is this idea that like movies are just starting. So like it's quite obvious to some people that movies are going to be a big thing. Like I feel like there's like this whole contingent of people that didn't even think movies were going to be a big industry. And especially like the banks he was working at. So he had like a niche where he's like, well, I have no leverage in my job at a bank, just being like some guy that's young in his career path. But if I want leverage young, I need to like expertise in one specific area or one specific vertical. And he saw motion pictures becoming this really big thing. And he has an experience in finance, and there's this whole need to like make actors have contracts with their production company and do equity splits of the revenue generated from the film. Like all this stuff needs to be figured out. Like now we have models for it, but back in like the 20s, like this needed to be incepted. And I think also helped that he was Irish Catholic, because most of the people that were on the cutting edge of financing movie production were Jews. And there's like a big market for being the not Jewish person that wants to finance something that's like the Jewish financed industry. So like he builds this brand as like an alt financer for like people that like hated Jews, I think.
yeah.
Um, and it's kind of interesting. Like I read this book, like The House of Morgan, which is about like the J.P. Morgan dynasty, and they were very much the same way. Where like the Rothschild Bank was the Jewish bank that was financing a lot of whatever stuff in the U.S. And the Morgan dynasty wanted to be the alt financers. Like, well, if you don't like the Rothschilds, like use us. So it's kind of, I don't know. It's kind of interesting how those things overlap.
Yeah.
But he starts doing this, and all right. So I guess so he starts doing this, and he has a job now producing movies. And this is like his late 20s, I want to say.
I think wasn't there also something in it about how it used to be that there wasn't stars in movies, and then they would just have random actors, but he was instrumental in popularizing the idea of movie stars like Marlene Dietrich and stuff like
Oh
that.
yeah, it's possible. Yeah, and I also think another interesting thing. I don't remember the specific thing about like him popularizing stars, but I do remember them saying that he didn't really care how good his movies were. He just wanted to make money, which I think is like a theme in a lot of these business. Like, if you read like Anthony Bourdain's book where he talks about like restaurants, he always says like the best restaurants are started by people that don't care about how good the restaurant is. They just want to make money. And like the worst restaurants are started by people that are like deadly passionate, where they're like, we love this like one area of Argentina and the food. It reminds us of home, and we just want to bring a taste of this to New York City. He'll be like, all right, you're out of business in 8 months. Like, and it's the people that are just like cutthroat and ruthless about it. So he saw movies as like a way to make money, and he didn't really care about the quality of his movie. But as he started going with it, I think like they just weren't making money off the movies, and he had to pivot. And he's like, all right, we need like some banging like stuff, because that's the way you're gonna make like the real money in the business.
Yeah.
All right. So also it should be noted that he marries a girl that I guess he met at Harvard named Rose, who's going to be pivotal throughout the story.
Also, their first daughter is named Rose, and apparently there's some really sketchy backstory about this. Like she had a lobotomy.
Oh yeah. Yeah. So all right. So we should say the Kennedys. They're gonna have 9 kids together.
Yeah.
So that's yeah.
Which is not atypical for Irish Catholic families.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I never put that one together, but yeah. So I guess they have 9 kids together. And they start having kids as he's getting this job financing a movie studio that requires him to fly to like Los Angeles all the time. So we should mention. So like the first kid is Joe Jr.
No, the first kid is Rose, the daughter.
No, she's the third kid, I think.
She is?
Yeah, I
thought
think
she was
so.
the first.
I don't think she's the oldest. I think Joe Jr. is the oldest.
Okay, I don't know. It's immaterial.
Yeah. And then John Kennedy is the second kid, which I think is interesting that he's not the oldest kid, because most people would not, like, if you're thinking of like a family and the person that rises to the grandest ambition, you would think of them as the first child, because it's like a thing, but he's not actually the first child.
Yeah, but he later becomes by accident.
And then they have another daughter named Rosemary who comes out like retarded with.
No, so, okay, this is not in the book, but I heard from somebody else that apparently she was just really promiscuous or something like that.
Oh, interesting.
And like ruining their family reputation. So they had her lobotomized and then just institutionalized for her entire life.
Yeah.
But I don't know how true that is.
Well, she gets lobotomized in the book.
Oh, so crazy.
But she gets lobotomized because they try to fix her because she comes
I
out
know, I
and she's
know.
retarded, but she's like still functional, and like they hear that like lobotomies can like potentially fix like this kind of mental illness, so they get her lobotomized and it makes everything completely worse because that's obviously what happened when you remove a chunk of your brain out like a hole you drilled in your skull with like not non-modern technology or whatever, but um yeah, and then he has a couple more daughters like Kathleen or something, and then like
Mm-mm-mm.
Eunice, and then he has Bobby Kennedy, and then Jean, which is another daughter who literally never gets mentioned in this book. She must be the most irrelevant person in the Kennedy family. Like Jean, what did she ever do? And then Ted Kennedy, who's the
Oh
youngest.
yeah,
Yeah, so his last kid's Ted Kennedy, and like five of these people are gonna become like massively famous
yeah,
throughout their lives, which is also interesting that he like thinks in these like empire dynamics, of he intentionally is like trying to create an empire with his family.
yeah, exactly. Like, and succeeded. Like Ted Kennedy was a senator from Massachusetts
Yeah, and
in
this
our
is
life.
like ninth kid.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
he's like
And then
yeah,
Robert Kennedy became the
attorney general
yeah,
under
yeah, yeah.
JFK, and JFK was president,
Exactly, crazy.
and yeah, it's actually interesting. Like Eunice Kennedy will start like what becomes like the Special Olympics because one of their daughters is like mentally
Huh.
handicapped. The Kennedy dynasty is going to like then pour like all their later wealth like into funding things to like help mentally like
Oh yeah, yeah,
handicapped
yeah.
people,
They
which is
did
really
so much
interesting.
of this. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's so interesting. So they all have a massive effect. But anyway, so he's having this dynasty being created as he's a movie producer like in LA, and he also cheats on his wife like every day.
Rapaciously.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is also interesting because he is very religious, but like clearly you can't just like cheat on your wife all the time if you're religious. But there's an anecdote in the book that's really funny where he says that adultery is a sin, but it is a sin that is easily forgiven by God. And he literally has a priest follow him around, like he's in his entourage, so that he can confess every time he cheats on his wife, like immediately, without having it like hang over his head.
This is what's so
Yeah.
interesting to me about Roman Catholicism as opposed to Protestantism or something like this. So with Roman Catholicism, you can just go to confession and then confess your sins and then it's over and you just wash your hands of it. But so in Protestantism, you don't have that easy escape hatch and you have to be guilty for your sins and like they're on your conscience and stuff like that because so I think in Roman Catholicism it's something like everything is just predetermined and it's like you'll go to heaven or hell, whatever. And it's just some kind of lottery grab bag. But then I think that like the founding of United States and all of this kind of Protestant work ethic and so on is really tied up with the fact that you are responsible for your own decisions and your own life and stuff like this.
Was that one of the like 95 thesis that like led Martin Luther to start Protestantism? Was just like people are committing sins and then confessing to that and just like LOLing about it? Was that like in his?
I think there's something about
Yeah.
that. Yeah, yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So it's actually so like he has this priest in his entourage where he can confess his sins to whenever he cheats on his wife, and he like makes sure the priest doesn't get like too uppity about his like penance that he makes him do. So if there's a priest that's like, oh yeah, that's really bad, you have to like stay faithful to your wife for a year, he'll be like, get out, I'm getting a new priest. And then the priest will be like, I don't know, just like say like 7 Hail Marys, and he'll be like, better. Literally like curates the priest. So oh man, it's so crazy. But anyway, he starts like, so like I guess he's just like moving up in life because he's like now doing his own thing, like financing movies, and he's hanging out with like for the first time like the top tier social club, because I guess like when he was a banker he was never on like the inside.
Oh yeah. They didn't live in the cool bougie suburb.
Yeah.
They lived in some B suburb called Hyannisport. And now there's a Kennedy Museum, which I visited actually with my parents because my cousins live close to there.
Yeah.
And it's really not a very interesting museum. Don't recommend it, but it was kind of cool. And it's in the same town as this Kennedy compound or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, so he feels like he's very on the outside, and as he like gets networked in with Hollywood people, he's now like an insider, and he's like, wow, I can like hook up with movie stars and I should do this. And yeah, it just starts like massive affairs with like famous movie stars that like he trades into like starring in his movies. And he does like he starts making a lot of money at this point, like taking the money from these movies and making, and this is like in the 1920s when the stock market's going gangbusters and things like that. And it seems like he did some pretty sketchy stuff. But like none of it was illegal, right? Because there's no SEC at the time.
Yeah, because he becomes
Yeah.
the first chairman of the SEC, which is crazy.
Yeah.
And then also, it's just so interesting to me now because, especially related to ETH and all these cryptocurrencies and ICOs, we're talking all the time about the SEC. like it's this big scary thing that's existed forever, and then just to know in my mind that this is just some crazy institution that was created by a guy that totally hated regulation and was
Yeah.
like a business guy and just like did it for like the lulz.
Yeah.
It's just such a joke, and I
Yeah.
don't know.
And I think it's I don't know, it's interesting because it's like it's still I think debatable whether or not he made his money in like a legit way or just insider trading and bootlegging, like everyone was doing in the
Oh
20s or
yeah,
something.
so he has the reputation of being a bootlegger, but
Yeah.
this book tries to really strongly assert that he was not bootlegging, and maybe if he did it, it was just like one thing, but
Yeah.
it was not fundamental to his.
There's a line in the book that like while he's trading all his movie profits in the 1920s that it's like Kennedy had a reputation or a knack for being in the right place at the right time with his trades. It's like because he was cheating.
Yeah.
I wanted to just like fill in that blank there, but anyway, he makes a ton of money, and then what's really interesting is he does not lose it when the stock market crashes. And I think he attributes this to his just like religious upbringing where he's super disciplined about how he chooses to invest his money.
Yeah, I like the Warren Buffett quote of be greedy when others are fearful and be fearful when others are greedy.
Yeah.
Price of ETH is low right now. Maybe I should be more greedy.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. And he is very much the contrarian that's hedges against the stock market crash, doesn't lose any money in the stock market crash. But the economy starts to tank. And he now, as a wealthy person that's trying to start this dynasty, is very concerned about the state of his finances as the Great Depression is coming on. So like Herbert Hoover is the presidential candidate and that's president from 1928 to 1932. He's doing a terrible job managing the depression. It's getting worse and worse and worse. And Kennedy is like very like Republican, I would say at this time, because he's like a Wall Street guy, essentially. He's a guy making big money insider trading stocks and doesn't want any government regulation. And FDR, even though he doesn't really campaign as a socialist, is probably, it's very...
Yeah, the New Deal was like seen as total socialism at the time.
It's obvious that he's more socially minded, but he still supports FDR because he thinks that Hoover will just run the country in the ground. He's going to lose all his money. So he's like just out of desperation. He's like, I don't agree with what he says, but it's like better than having Hoover. And this is kind of interesting, right? So like while he's in LA, like doing this movie stuff, he links up with like William Randolph Hearst, who's like
The man.
the leading media figure of the time, right?
Have you ever seen his estate?
No, I never have.
Simeon? It's
No.
totally crazy. So the movie,
Citizen Kane.
yeah, Citizen
Or
Kane
yeah.
is supposedly about him.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
then so I looked up his estate, San Simeon, which is totally insane. Had like zebras and giraffes and stuff all over it, and it's like a Spanish crazy
Like Pablo Escobar or whatever.
Yeah. Spanish like how to say villa was like deconstructed from Spain and then shipped over to America and then rebuilt in California on the coast. It's insane.
Damn.
And now it's a museum.
Still there? Or
Yeah, it's a museum now.
Yeah. So I don't know that much about him, but he was very well known and he's very influential in California. And he doesn't like FDR very much either. So there's the guy that's running against FDR for the Democratic nomination in 1932 is a guy named John Garner. And because Hearst just like wills it, like Garner wins California in the Democratic primary and they have a lot of like delegates or whatever. And even though FDR has like more delegates, he doesn't have enough to win the nomination. And Joseph Patrick Kennedy is friends with William Randolph Hearst. And when it comes to the Democratic nomination, they basically like do this like weird thing where they hold these delegates from California hostage unless like FDR will agree to make John Garner his vice president and will allow like Joseph Patrick Kennedy to work in his administration. Because like then it's like William Randolph Hearst gets another guy, one of his guys into the administration. And like it's just like classic like old school politics where they like broker this deal and FDR wins the election in 1932 and starts this like crazy program called the New Deal, which, oh my God, it's so interesting to read about it in the context of this book because the New Deal sounds like a startup. It's like all these government agencies are just getting created out of thin air. And it's like, all right, our economy's in the shit like hole right now. And all you rich people like need to figure out how to make it work or you're all going to go bankrupt.
No, it's so much more interesting than that.
Yeah.
Because also it's like on the heels of the Bolshevik Revolution and like in the midst of like fascism and then like Italy and Germany's economies are like supposedly booming and the Soviet Union is constructing these huge dams that are like the biggest dams in the world. And then there's like people agitating all the time in the United States like for a communist revolution or a fascist takeover. And like the New Deal is some kind of like weird quasi like governmental sort of socialistic thing and like people are scared because they don't know what's going on and like, you know what I mean? Then Italy is like invading Ethiopia and like it's just craziness.
Yeah. And all these government programs get created and one of them is the SEC. And because Joe Kennedy had experience working on Wall Street or like as a banking president, he's the guy that gets tapped to head the SEC.
Because they don't want to put an anti-business guy in head of it because they don't want to scare the
Right.
business people and like ruin the economy again.
Yeah, and that's the theme. He's like, I'm on your side. I know every trick in the book. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I want to protect businesses, but I also know all the shady shit that they do because I was doing all of it.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
it's this kind of like weird thing. Like now, like if you said, oh, we're gonna get this guy that's a white collar criminal to regulate white collar businesses, it would be seen as like shady somehow. But it actually like did kind of work in this respect, where he like the legislation that gets written in the first 2 years of the SEC's existence is like still canon almost. So the Security Act of 1933 and 1934, like I learned about this in my accounting classes in like college. And this is stuff that's written. It's not like written by Joe Kennedy,
But he was
but it's
instrumental in
like,
the
yeah, he's like
creation
the
of it.
president of the SEC. So yeah, it's so. But it just seems like the smartest people in the room were working for the government at this time, which is just an interesting dynamic. 'Cause it's like very much not the case right now.
Yeah.
And like they're kind of like trying, like this thing like the U.S. Digital Service or whatever.
No.
It's like these guys that fixed the healthcare.gov website because like when the healthcare.gov rollout like was a fiasco a couple years ago, they had all these dudes from like Google and Silicon Valley come in and like just like fix it all like immediately. And it was like, wow, you guys are really useful. Do you want to just like start a government agency that's just dedicated to like building software for the government?
Impossible.
And
I mean, come on. All of the important and cool, like we just did the review of Blackwater,
Yeah.
The government, I feel like, can't do
Yeah.
anything as effectively as private
It's
industries in this
interesting.
modern age.
They have this dude, Matt Cutts, who like was the head of search at Google for a while, works there now. I applied there once and they didn't like, didn't pass the first round because they asked if you smoked weed and I said yes. And they're like, well, we can't hire you. And I'm like, how are you going to ever hire a decent developer if you cut off everyone that smokes weed? This is so silly.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And then I just like chastised them for like 10 minutes on the phone about how stupid a system this was. Yeah. Anyway, so you're probably right.
Totally.
So anyway, he's the head of the SEC. And then he decides he doesn't want to work as the head of the SEC anymore. And he wants to like almost like leverage himself up in FDR's good graces. So he wants to take on like progressive, because I guess the SEC didn't really have cachet at the time. So he just like starts like leveraging favors up the food chain of FDR's administration. He becomes like the head of the Maritime Committee, which is people that are like working on building ships for America's Navy. And it's such an interesting time to do this, right? Because it's like pretty obvious to people that are paying attention that things are going to get really bad in Europe. Like you were saying, like Italy's like invading Ethiopia and Hitler's like taking these territories back from France and like Czechoslovakia. And he's thinking like, okay, well,
and rearming like crazy. Didn't he travel there and see like there was also who's the guy
his
who
son
did that
was there.
first?
He said his son there.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
Joe Kennedy Jr. is like in Germany, like giving him reports about like what Hitler's doing.
Yeah. But who's the guy? Charles Lindbergh, right?
Yeah. He's friends with
Crazy.
Charles Lindbergh. He
Yeah,
becomes like
yeah.
really good friends with Charles Lindbergh, which is interesting. But yeah, so he he's basically thinking, okay, well, we're doing a lot of commerce with Europe, but if war breaks out, they're going to recall all those ships and use them, like repurpose them for military vessels, which means all our trade's going to stop. So like we need to like build like a massive like navy ourselves. Like he's like MAGA-ing it a little bit.
Oh, want to hear a funny anecdote? I guess not funny, but like about ships in Europe in World War II. Okay, so while France, like as France lost and then was like just taken over by Germany and then like signed this armistice with like the Nazis or whatever, then the British immediately bombed the entire French fleet that was in North Africa, like all their warships. And my friend, who I guess his grandfather or something died in this, was saying that it was kind of like this cynical ploy by the British government to knock out the French Navy from like the world, whatever scene, because they used to be like
They
rivals.
just didn't want competition or whatever.
Yeah. So like, apparently they just like bombed all of these ships in like Marseille harbor or whatever, like right afterwards.
Yeah, it's fucking crazy, right? Because like ships were probably way harder to make back then. It's like a big deal if you lost like 5 of them or something.
Yeah.
Oh man, yeah, the trolling, like World War II. I'm not so familiar with like the military like battles that happen like orthogonally to the main fronts, but there's probably a lot of this of like people just sending ships in weird expeditions and getting bombed and.
Yeah. Have you ever read Cryptonomicon?
No.
Oh God, that book is so epic. But one of the funny characters in it is this guy who is the captain of a U-boat, and he just decides that he doesn't feel like fighting anymore, so he just like travels all around the world in the U-boat.
That's awesome.
Yeah, imagine you could totally do that.
Yeah, you
because
totally
nobody
could.
would know where you were or what you were doing.
Yeah,
And so like if you
yeah.
just had a cool crew with you, you could just like go to Jamaica
And then if you spoke
like,
German, you could just sync up with German ships. Be like, I'm German. I was over here for war. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Or then you just go to Jamaica or like go to the like Indonesia and just kick it and like
Wow.
whatever.
Dude, that's a crazy thought. I'm sure that happened. Wow. Yeah, anyway, so he's he's the head of this like maritime commission, and then he works up the food chain or like does enough for FDR that he is able to become the ambassador to England in like 1938 or something. So
Yeah,
like right
the
before,
craziest time ever.
like yeah, so like imagine what this guy's already done. He's like been a banking president out of Harvard, whatever, not interesting. But then he becomes a movie producer as movies are becoming a thing. He's the head of the SEC as the like all this New Deal government programs are starting.
Yeah,
He's the head of like the Maritime Commission as we need to like MAGA shipbuilding back to the U.S. And then he becomes the ambassador to England as World War II is about to fucking break out.
Yeah.
Like,
It's
Jesus,
crazy.
man, this is like. And then
But he was pissed off. He was not happy about that, wasn't
yeah,
he?
Yeah, because he is
He
going
wanted
to
to
be
be like
away
the
from
war
his
minister
family.
or something
Yeah,
like that.
he wanted a cabinet position. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
this
yeah.
is kind of like the downgrade.
Yeah.
And it's like fucking boring. Like being an ambassador is apparently boring. Like you're doing like paperwork the whole time.
Yeah,
But
he was really pissed about
yeah,
it, right?
yeah, yeah. It's like not a good use of his skills. Like anyone could do this, but it ends up being obviously really interesting.
Yeah.
So anyway, he becomes it, and so his MO as ambassador is that he does not want America to enter World War II. This is his thing, and it's because he has this fucking dynasty that he's trying to build. Like he like rants to everyone that he wants to leave $1 million to each of his kids. That's his like goal of life.
Oh yeah, and then he doesn't want his sons to get killed in the war.
Yeah, and he doesn't want his fucking sons to go to the war, which I also think is really interesting because like now it's like really weird that all the like European leaders don't have kids. It's like a strange, like Merkel doesn't have kids and like Macron doesn't have kids,
Yeah, interesting.
But it's like the first time that's really happened. But it's like guys like Joseph Patrick Kennedy, like I'm trying to build a fucking dynasty. I don't want a war. But it like gives you like that kind of perspective, which is like lacking from the world now, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, he's doing this, and Neville Chamberlain is the Prime Minister of England at the time.
Oh yeah, and they're homies.
Yeah, and he's a fucking and it's so weird because like we think of Neville Chamberlain now as like a pariah almost.
Yeah, everyone hates him.
Yeah.
He's an appeaser and a loser.
Yeah, he's like considered this, but like at the time, like the smartest people are like very pro Chamberlain.
And Winston Churchill, everyone loves and reveres him in America, but it's so interesting. People in Germany hate him and think of him as like a kind of Hitler. It's so fascinating because
he kind of was though.
Yeah, but I think it's because like if you ever look at a picture of the city of Cologne in 1945, it's like traumatizing. It's so crazy. Literally every building in the entire city is just flattened to the ground, except for the one church. It's so crazy. But then and like these blanket carpet bombings were just like totally gratuitous and stuff like that. So people like, I don't know, they really hate him there.
Yeah, and I remember there was an anecdote from World War II where like they were just like discovering firebombing, which is like when you bomb a city, but then like you like time it with the wind or like the fire blows
like
over
in a
on the
circle
other.
so that it gets oxygen. It's so crazy.
And like he did this by accident, like because the wind like did something where like they did a bombing campaign, it did like 5x the damage they thought. And everyone's like, holy shit, we shouldn't do this again. And Churchill's like, we should do this tomorrow.
Yeah, but TBH,
yeah.
the Nazis did start it. Like, they did it to Rotterdam, and they tried to do it to London and stuff like this.
Yeah.
And Covington.
Definitely. Yeah, they definitely did. But anyway, so at the time, Hitler is starting to get very Hitlery. And Chamberlain is thinking, well, let's just work with him. Like, and I think... Wait, do you hear that feedback?
It's an airplane.
Holy shit, is that like picking up an airplane from outside?
I think so, yeah.
That was fucking crazy. All right,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Anyway, so...
Which is crazy. Think about this. Like, think about living in London at the time of the Blitz or something like this, because Joseph Patrick Kennedy was living there at that time, while, like, Luftwaffe airplanes were just flying to London and just dropping bombs, like, as they like.
Oh my god, yeah, it's crazy. Like, there's an anecdote from the book that he, like, literally sits on the roof of whatever house he's in and just watches the Blitz, like, with a fucking helmet. Just, like... And think about just, like, what pussies the fucking people that, like, send people to war now are. Like, they didn't have to watch the Blitz from a fucking rooftop, like, while people are getting murdered in the streets or whatever.
Dude, one book that we should do is the speeches that Winston Churchill gave on the radio at this time. Could you imagine? Okay, so, like, people think Barack Obama is a good orator. Could you imagine if, like, some country was just dropping bombs on New York City and Washington, D.C. and San Francisco every night, and then Barack Obama had to get on TV and make speeches about it and, like, to, like, fire people up and be like... And then, like, all our allies were just, like, getting taken over or, like, getting in against us.
Yeah, you had to be on the next level.
Oh, my God, it's so crazy.
Yeah, it's so crazy. Like, so this is why Kennedy hates him. It's like, Kennedy is trying to keep the U.S. out of the war. And so, like, the thing about England's, like, Neville Chamberlain's the president, the fucking Winston Churchill's, like, the war minister, but it's, like, very obvious that he's, like, going to try and, like, overthrow Chamberlain and become the president or whatever. And Joseph P. Kennedy's like, this guy will literally never give up fighting. He will fight till the last person is killed. He will fight until America is in the war. That's why he hates him. He's like, this guy will keep this war going forever until America joins because he has no give up in him. And like he literally says, he's like, there's nothing the Nazis can do. If they fucking come take England, I will retreat to Canada and I will still fight them. Like he's just he's insane. But maybe in a good way. I don't know. But anyway, so Joseph B. Kennedy and this whole bastion of people are very much in the thing of like working with Hitler. But it just starts getting like progressively harder, I guess. Like,
or also, so wait, just to like digress for a second, it's so fascinating that while he was the ambassador of England at this time, he was arranging for his first son, Joseph Patrick Kennedy, to like go meet Mussolini, to meet the Pope, to meet Hitler. It's so insane. Yeah. Like, could you imagine you're a 20-something years old guy from Harvard, like going to meet like all these crazy world leaders?
I think it's cool how John Adams did this. Like, John Adams had his first son, John Quincy Adams, and he sends him to be like diplomats and like emissaries all over the world. And like that's his job since he's like 14 is to like go meet and work with other leaders, and then he comes back and like becomes president of the U.S.
That's such an insane pedigree. I think I was drinking like beer out of like Bud
when you were 14.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah, it is cool. So like he's basically grooming his first son, Joe Kennedy Jr., to like be the cultured person, the emissary, his protege that he's gonna like live exuberantly through. And he's trying to avoid the war, but like I said, it just gets harder. Like there's
but little does he know.
Well, he does know. That's the thing, is that he is like very much predicting. So this is like a big thing, right? Like with World War I, like almost nobody predicted how bad it was going to be. Everyone thought it'd be like a quick little thing, and then just like people just start getting fucking mowed down, and it's just like horrific, and it just goes on forever. World War II, I think people were kind of like that, where people underestimated it, but there were definitely people calling the horns, and he's one of them, where he's like, this is going to be really bad, it's unsalvageable, our allies are going to be killed, democracy, because like he could see the German war machine for what it was. He's like, there will be no democracy in Europe, this is terrible, like let's just work with Hitler, like figure this shit out, do not go to war, it's going to and America's going to get dry. Like he's like predicting this whole thing. But like then shit like Kristallnacht, where like there's like public basically like destruction of property for like Jews, and they all get like expelled. And now his job becomes like dealing with the Jewish refugee problem from Germany as like the US ambassador, and like like Palestine is still a British territory at this time. So he has to deal with figuring out like how many Jewish refugees are going to go to Palestine, how many are going to go to England, how many are going to the US. And like they definitely fail on this regard, and I think this is like well considered like a failure of history, that the U.S. and Britain and Palestine, like, or I guess Palestine through Britain, just like basically don't do a good enough job of like getting the Jewish refugees out of Germany, and because of that, a lot of them start like having horrific violence that gets like more and more public and more indefensible, to the point where like war seems almost like inevitable. And then like there's all this stuff like with Czechoslovakia, where Hitler's like, I'm gonna take these 3 million like in the Ruhr Valley or whatever, and Chamberlain's like, fine, but like don't do anything else. And then he like takes the rest of Czechoslovakia, and he's like, fuck you guys, and it's like, oh god,
yeah.
like this is happening, and it just obviously like shit hits the fan.
And then he invades Poland, and then Chamberlain resigns or something like this.
I think he just gets kicked out, or like Churchill just like takes over, and he's like, I've got this from here.
Yeah.
And England and France enter the war, and like France gets conquered immediately, and then like the Germans just set up like bombs like on,
and then
like,
France quits, and then it's so interesting, they elected this guy, somebody Pétain, who was the heroic general for France in World War I, and then he becomes a Nazi, or like a French Vichy like leader. And so it's like so interesting when you travel to France, and like they have such a weird history of this era, because so like right now it's like heroic to remember like the French resistance and blah blah blah, but at the time that's totally not how it was. And like Coco Chanel was like living in Paris and like dating like the lead Nazi and all of this shit, and yeah, like all this crazy stuff.
Yeah, and they also take all their planes and like boats. So it's like they immediately conquer the French army and just take all their stuff. And
so an interesting story of this is that they made the French government sign the treaty where they like took over half of France in the same train car, in the same area of track where the Germans signed the treaty with France at the end of World War I.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's some payback, baby. Yeah, and they just start pointing all this shit at Britain, and it's like very obvious that they're next. They have the French fleet now. They have the French airplanes. They have
and then Italy gets in against them.
Fucking guns that they're just blasting.
Yeah.
And it's like, all right, let's just take England and like fucking end liberal democracy in Europe. But
And there's also the British Expeditionary Force that goes over to fight with them, and then they get routed at Dunkirk
Yeah.
and have to go back to England.
yeah, and for somehow they get back to England, which is like crazy. And if that doesn't happen, who knows what happens in World War II?
Yeah.
And Christopher Nolan would have never made a movie about it. But
And there's also Erwin Rommel taking over all of North Africa.
just destroying shit in Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like looking really bad. And then somehow.
Oh, and the pact with Russia. So Russia's also like a neutral at this time.
Yeah. Russia's invading Poland from the right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it just looks like, and like it's like real fucked for the Allies. And Joseph P. Kennedy's still in England. He doesn't go back to the U.S. He stays in England because as like he's like relaying messages to FDR, but then like he's such a fucking isolationist. He's like, dude, do not like this is gonna be so bad if the U.S. gets in this war. Like if they get the English fleet, because England had the biggest navy at the time in the world, and they're like, if they get the English fleet, they're gonna come fucking sail west and like go after the U.S. Do not like do anything stupid. And FDR is like, dude, we should fucking fuck up Europe. Like he wants to get in this war and fight. So he starts like back channeling with Churchill like around his ambassador Joseph P. Kennedy.
Yeah, to like loan him money and stuff like this.
And Joseph P. Kennedy like is fucking furious, which is gonna like
the Lend-Lease, right?
Yeah, and he's gonna end up like opposing this shit like vehemently. Like
I remember they use this analogy like a garden hose. They're like, if your neighbor's house is on fire and you have a garden hose, then you don't like lend it to them and be like, oh well, how much money will you give me for the garden hose? You just give them the garden hose and then later they'll like pay it back for you. That was the analogy that he used on the radio to convince people that Lend-Lease was a good idea.
So he wants to fund, like you're saying, he wants to fund the Ally war effort, but like not send American troops, right? That's the big thing. It's like we don't want to send American troops into a European war, but we'll just send like our boats and supplies and whatever. And Kennedy's against this because he's like, no, it's gonna fucking escalate. Like if you give England supplies, then they're gonna fight longer and the war is going to escalate, and then the U.S. is going to have to get involved, and my kids are going to have to go to war, and like, fuck you, I don't want to do this. So he's like against it. So he has like massive tension with FDR. So yeah, it's such a crazy like politic thing, but he's there for the Blitz. Like he's in England while they're getting bombed, and like
but he gets recalled at some point, right? Because they just like are so sick of hearing his like
bitching about how like
what is it, Cassandra? Is that what it is?
The soothsayer. Cassandra's like the prophet or whatever.
I know, but are you like a Cassandra when you say that bad stuff is happening all the time?
I think so. Cassandra's like she makes predictions about the future, but then no one believes her, but they're always right. So like maybe he's kind of like that. But I think it's like really badass that he was there, and like his like family's there too. Or like some people are like the kids like are like in and out of there.
Oh yeah,
like
and
so
like
Joe and Jack enlist in the war. But they're just like in reserves because the U.S. isn't in the war, and like his daughter's there, and she like marries a guy. She's like in love with him.
Oh yeah.
But then he
the
like
Duke of whatever, right?
Yeah, he joins the British Army
and gets killed.
Dude, World War World War II is so fucked up. Like just in terms of how everyone was in the military, and like everyone's gonna like fucking kill each other in this war and whatever.
Yeah, and the lobotomized daughter also lives in England at like some kind of estate for whatever.
Yeah, it really crazy drama. But anyway, so he eventually gets recalled. FDR comes up with this Lend-Lease bill, and he gives like a speech against it, and like just gets completely exiled. FDR is like, get the fuck out of my campaign. We're going to war. Pearl Harbor happens. Hitler declares war on the U.S. The U.S. is fully in now.
Hitler invades Russia.
Yeah, there you go. Operation Barbarossa.
Yeah.
God, what an idiot. Anyway, so anyway, Jack gets deployed to the Pacific, and like he has this crazy story where he's like on a boat, and like there's 13 people on this boat.
No, JFK gets to
Jack. Whatever they call him, Jack Kennedy. He's like John F. Kennedy, but like his name was Jack Kennedy.
But Joseph gets deployed to Belgium or something?
Yeah, he's in the Air Force, like I guess the Navy, but he's a pilot. So he's in like England as a pilot. And then Jack,
and he's the one that's actually like groomed to be the prodigy, and like goes to meet all these world leaders, and like everyone thinks he's great, and everyone thinks JFK sucks because he has like a back injury.
That's another thing. Like, so JFK is sick his entire life. He's like
he's like a sickly loser normie dork. Yeah, and his brother's like a cool football hero.
I think this is really interesting because his brother is like captain of the football team, like banging hot girls all the time, and JFK is like a sickly loser, but he's so sick all the time that he just like reads books.
Yeah, interesting.
So he has like all this time to just like read books and not get distracted by like the social affections of like being one of Joseph P. Kennedy's sons, which I think ends up being.
And he also played football, even though he sucked at it.
Yeah, because he went to like Princeton because he didn't want to be in the shadow of his older brother, and then his dad transferred. And then his dad's like, "This just go to fucking Harvard. I'm just gonna get you into Harvard. Just go to Harvard." And he like transfers to Harvard, which I think is funny. But anyway, he's in the Pacific, and he like has this crazy story where he is on a boat and it's rammed by a Japanese battleship,
Yeah.
And there's 13 people on the boat, and it like blows up, and they just assume that they killed everyone, but they didn't actually kill everyone. And like JFK survives, like fucking Leo DiCaprio in Titanic, like like on driftwood,
Yeah,
and he
yeah.
like saves one of his boatmates and like drags him to like an island and like writes a message like in a coconut because that's all that they had to like come rescue it, and like somehow delivers this message to people in the Navy, and they come and rescue him, and he like saved this guy's life and is like considered like a war hero, which is like he like it's like front page of the newspapers, like Joseph P. Kennedy's son is like a war hero.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's like probably a lot of propaganda and stuff like going on this time, but
For sure.
he like gets recalled and comes back like as a war hero. And his brother, it's so interesting like what ends up happening, but like apparently so he's in like the Air Force or whatever, and he like has a job that's like not very dangerous because his dad like hooked it up.
Yeah, but he volunteers for like a crazy mission where he's like guaranteed to die or something like that.
Yeah, he like volunteered for a suicide mission
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something where they're gonna like go like these guns that the Germans commandeered that are in Belgium that are just peppering the like English island like from Belgium somehow with these crazy fucking guns that they have, and they're like blowing up buildings, and they're gonna fly over the English Channel like into Belgium and try to like take them out, which is basically like a suicide mission at the time. And he volunteers for it, which is insane. I guess I don't know what it is. He just wanted to be like a hero or something,
Yeah, I have no idea.
and he gets killed, which is yeah. That's the and it's interesting. It's like so. Joseph P. Kennedy set up this like Kennedy family to be like this dynasty,
Yeah.
and it's about to like become like a fucking Shakespearean tragedy.
Yeah, yeah, totally. It's a
Like
Greek tragedy. It's even worse than Shakespeare.
yeah, it's like right. Yeah, it's about to get like really bad, and it's just so fascinating the like rise and fall of this. But anyway, his oldest son that he's grooming to be like the president of the United States.
Totally, like explicitly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is and like literally unseat FDR, who he's pissed off at.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
is killed in World War II. And obviously it's a horrible tragedy. And fucking Kathleen's husband is
Oh,
killed
yeah,
like the
also
next day or whatever.
crazy.
Yeah. God, and like I think you realize like reading it, it's like the people that like really suffered in this are like the parents.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because like it sounds like like John F. Kennedy had like fun. They're like just shooting the shit. Like, isn't it cool? We got like fucking got to like combat with the Japanese. It's like fun. It's like a bro thing. Like it's like fun for people.
Yeah, yeah, totally.
Like
I remember my grandfather was like
Yeah.
taking pictures, like playing volleyball on like aircraft carriers and stuff like this, and was like telling all about how like they used to go around playing volleyball all the time.
Yeah, it's like an interesting adventure for like people before they had TV or radio or whatever.
Yeah.
But like for the parents, it just sucked.
Or
It's like-
travel. Like you couldn't just travel around. Like when else would you have the opportunity to just like
Yeah.
go kick it in Japan for a while?
that's a great point. Like you would never know what the Pacific Ocean looked like if you lived in New York or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's but for the parents it sucked, and he like it's really bad that he loses his like protege and his namesake, which I think is interesting.
Oh yeah.
It's like he's named after him,
That's
but then he
fascinating.
dies. So it's like
Whoa.
it's like
crazy,
really
right?
fucks with you.
Oh yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
Man, it's really bad. So anyway, the war ends.
Also, he's like alienated. He destroyed his career by opposing like FDR and opposing the war and all this stuff. But then the war happened, and so it's just like he's totally disgraced. No one wants anything
Yeah.
to do with him. He's like out of the administration. He's not one of the cool kids
Yeah.
anymore.
And,
Unfortunately for him.
And he's like going around doing "I told you so" to everyone. He's like, I saw this shit coming. I knew it would happen, and
Yeah,
now like
yeah,
I
yeah.
lost my first son. Like fuck everyone. Like just he's in like one of these moods.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
But then FDR like wants to win another term, like really badly. And because Joseph P. Kennedy is so like this big Irish Catholic figure, like he
Oh,
literally
yeah.
like controls the Irish Catholic
And
vote.
he knows the Pope and stuff.
Yeah.
Crazy.
He's like friends with the Pope.
Yeah.
And he like FDR's like, God damn it. we need this dude. It's
Just
like-
so funny. Identity politics.
Yeah.
Crazy.
But it literally works that way. Like
I know,
they
it
vote like
does.
90%
It totally does.
for
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the
totally.
whoever. Yeah. It, and he like eventually like weasels his way back into the administration. And like after the war, oh man, like all this like rebuilding shit is so interesting. So like after World War II, the U.S. becomes like very globalist, and they have like
Because they have to. Because they have to like counter
the Marshall
Soviet Union
Plan,
and so on.
and yeah, they're fighting communism everywhere. And again, Kennedy's like, you guys are still idiots. Like, stop intervening in other countries' affairs. Just like focus on making America. Like, it's really like funny. Like, this is like an extreme position now, but like, there were people vehemently arguing for this, like right after World War II. But obviously, they lose out. And I don't know. It just seems like natural that they would lose out. Like, it just seems like the natural momentum is towards like expansion and like more aggression and more control.
Because that's like now it's history and it's already been written, so it seems inevitable. But I guess at the time it was like, that's like what you said about innovation. Like, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So just look at like what could have been but wasn't.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So he's very trying to oppose all this expansion and like the Korean War, and it's gonna be like ironic, right? Because like John F. Kennedy is the one that's gonna like essentially start the Vietnam War.
Yeah.
So it's ironic, and yeah, and JFK is like actually at the time like writing some dope shit. Like he wrote like policy papers that are
Oh
like
yeah, he wrote a
pretty,
book, right?
yeah, that are like considered like pretty like well done like policy
I
papers.
don't know about that. I think he wrote like his thesis from
Yeah,
like his graduate
Harvard or whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and then they published it as a book.
yeah, but
I've never read it, but
it's supposed to be pretty good.
hmm.
And I think like his dad at some point like pivots towards I'm going to like John F. Kennedy, this like guy that was like a complete loser nerd, is now a war hero.
Yeah.
And my first son died, and like maybe this has some potential
Oh,
to
so
it.
it's so
Yeah.
fascinating that okay, so like so Robert Caro is my favorite author maybe, and he wrote this book series called The Years of Lyndon Johnson, and one of the fascinating things about Lyndon Johnson at this time is that he knows that everybody has to go and be a war hero if they want to be a politician. So he like flies in this. He goes to Japan and then flies in one mission where they get like attacked by some like Mitsubishi Zeros or something like that, and then he comes back and like the guy like cynically gives him a medal for like just flying on this one mission, and then he goes back and travels all around Texas telling people about how he's a war
Like
hero
with
and
his
stuff.
medal and like
Yeah,
a
yeah, exactly.
frame or whatever. Yeah, but it was like this, and it's so funny. Like Joseph P. Kennedy had so much sway that he like didn't like the medal that John F. Kennedy got. He's like, I need a higher medal, and he like literally like yells at FDR for like an hour. He's like, "Are you really coming to me when you fucking gave my son this shit medal like, for fucking being a war?" Like he's literally like, has that much control. Where he's like, "The medal that you gave my son is not good enough. I need a better one so that I can." Yeah. So I guess
And he gets real into like the whole propaganda machine, or I don't know how to call it, like the campaign machine behind JFK. What's the first thing that he runs for? I forget.
This is so interesting. Okay, so this is like 1952 or something that JFK runs for just like a congressional seat. I
In
think
Boston,
in
right?
Boston.
Yeah.
They go back to Boston because like the war, he's just like can't deal with like mainstream politics, and he's still like very well liked in Boston. But like, okay, what happened in 1952 is like television is getting invented for the first time. And like this is another fucking thing that he's just like just the way his life worked out is like on the inception of it. So he's a movie guy and like he's used to like producing films. So and he's like kind of a visionary in and of himself. So he's like thinking of JFK as a politician, like I need to craft this guy's image for television. And he literally like from like basically when color television started, he's teaching JFK how to speak. He's teaching him his cadence. He's teaching him his image, how he needs to look, how he needs to fix his stutter, and like crafting him for what he sees as like the way people will consume political media in the future.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting. So he runs for Senate, or he runs for Congress, and then like Kathleen dies in like a plane crash. That's in like another one of these tragedy things.
Oh, yeah,
yeah. Like
yeah.
one of the sisters that lost her husband, she like dies in a plane crash at some point.
It's so crazy, this guy's life.
Yeah, it's just like now he's down 2 kids and one of them's retarded.
Yeah.
And JFK, we know what's gonna happen with this one.
Yeah. And Robert in the future too.
Yeah, it's so ridiculous. But so JFK, like he grooms him to run for like Congress, and he is that, but he's like sick the whole time. Like he's really really sick, and doesn't really do anything. But he still like gets this crazy idea that he should run for Senate in 1956 against this guy like Henry Cabot Lodge that like I don't know anything about, but apparently he's like a very like similar guy to JFK. He's just like a young, handsome, like from a rich family, but he just like decides he's gonna take him out anyway, and like no one gives him like odds to do it, but like JFK just like has so much money and like his image is so crafted, and he just like hustles really hard and like wins the Senate seat in like 1956 or whatever, and that's like a really big deal because now he's starting to get like a little buzz. Like he gives like really good speeches, and then I guess it was the 1956 election. It was Eisenhower. Just like no one thought Eisenhower would lose again, so Eisenhower and Nixon win, and then in 1960 he decides that he's going to run for president.
Yeah, after like such a short time in the Senate, he's just like
and he was like sick the whole time. He didn't do anything.
Yeah,
but they just decide they're going to go, and he goes against Nixon. And I guess what was the issue? So I guess the issue is like there had never been a Catholic president.
Yeah, exactly.
Before...
Because Catholics are supposed to give their first allegiance to the Pope and then to the country. So it's really interesting. Like England, the Church of England is fascinating because like, so one of the other differences of Protestantism, other than that like guilt thing, is that, so like in Roman Catholicism, the Pope is like the number one dude, but in Protestantism, the law of the country is like the number one law.
Oh.
And so like this is like the Anglican church, like the king is the head of the church in England. Whereas like in Italy, like the Pope is the head of it. And like in Germany, it's like kind of half and half. And also like in France, I guess it's like mostly Roman Catholic. But then like, yeah, this is just another one of the dynamics because like people thought that he would have like divided loyalties. Like if the Pope said like do this, and the Pope was fucking with him and like trying like as
They didn't want him to run.
yeah, exactly. This is so fascinating
Yeah.
because also like it's just so interesting that like the bishops and cardinals and stuff, they knew that they had power and they were like the most powerful like Roman Catholic people in America at this time. But if there was a Roman Catholic president, he would be the most powerful Roman Catholic person like at that time.
Oh
Yeah,
shit!
yeah,
So it
yeah.
was like too much competition.
Exactly.
Oh
So
my
they like try and
God.
screw him, and they're
Yeah.
like, the Pope was releasing like statements where he was like, yeah, all Roman Catholics like have to do what the Pope says all the time, and that's just the rules. And like they would publish this in newspapers, and then like Joseph Patrick Kennedy would be like, what the fuck, man? You're fucking with us. Like I thought you would help us.
You know what else is interesting? It's like, so this whole book, like they talk about this guy like Arthur Kroc, who's like a journalist for the New York Times, that is literally like Joseph P. Kennedy's like professional publicist. Like it's like his best friend in the media that like you like needed one of these guys at the time where whenever you needed a story specifically or someone to defend you, like he just had one guy that would do it constantly. And he was like first tier in his entourage. But it's just really interesting that he had one of these. Because I guess what's so important back then, and this is also something that's like really funny to think about, is like these guys were like when like JFK's running, like they'll do this like really massive editorial where his dad will like say something through this guy Arthur Kroc, and it's like so formally like published. And if you think back to like the election we just had in the U.S., it's like, you know, this 22-year-old journalism major for like some stupid online blog like posting their thought. Like it's just so like distanced from this like epic like way that people would do political media back in.
Yeah, because there was a bar to publishing then, so it was like
Yeah.
you had to be somebody to get your ideas out there into the realm of like accepted dialogue or just in the realm of people hearing about it. But now like with the internet, like
Yeah, man, but it just seemed like way more badass. Like everything that was written just like seemed more badass than it is like the filter. It was like a low pass filter or something
Yeah, it's
that
true.
just like cuts out like shitty quality stuff.
but also cuts out some good shit, you know?
Yeah, sure, fair enough. Anyway, so I guess he runs for president. What else happens around this time? I don't remember, but he runs against Nixon, and obviously like the big thing is that they have these like TV debates for the first time.
Yeah, to the extreme consternation of Lyndon Baines Johnson. So they were running against each other for the Democratic primary or
Yeah,
whatever,
yeah.
and then Johnson lost. And he was like tailoring his whole life for this moment, and then like it was snatched away from him. And in the book that by Robert Caro, he's just so pissed about this, and he just hates JFK's guts because he like went to Harvard and all this stuff, but Lyndon Johnson went to like this mid Texas teachers college and was just like grew up on like this super backwater farm or whatever, and like pulled himself up by his bootstraps and just like this total badass. And he sees JFK as this dude with like a silver spoon in his mouth and just like hates him so much. But since he's from the South, then JFK knows that he needs somebody from the South to run on his same ticket. And so they offer him this position to run as the vice president at this Democratic election. And so Robert Caro does this thing where he really calculates like, okay, so like if JFK wins, like there's no way that he can run in the next one and blah, 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 blah. But like the chances of, so like there's something like 4 presidents that have been assassinated in office. So, and like out of 50. So like actually if he takes the vice president thing, then his chances are pretty good at like becoming the president. And like there's all these conspiracy theories that
LBJ was
had something
knew
to do
about
with
it. Yeah. Wow. Dude, I'm so not versed on the Kennedy assassination conspiracies.
My grandmother was weirdly super into it. But I guess like if you grew up at that time and like saw him get assassinated, you might have been more into it. I don't know.
Oh man, I'm normally versed on conspiracy theories too, but I don't know too much about that one. Yeah, it's crazy. Like Kennedy apparently did not like him very much either, and like felt really shitty making him his vice president. They talk about this in the book too, where like he wins the Democratic nomination and is like somber. It's like a funeral because they know that they had to make LBJ their running mate, and like they just like don't like him. Yeah, and it's just like they're like fuck.
Because
Like,
he's kind
what
of a hillbilly.
like what are we doing to like this or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's still like a big deal, and his dad's really proud. He's like, I'm the father of a fucking presidential candidate. Let's go, baby. And like he was like, no one thought JFK could do it, but he like came into his own and like surprised everyone with how good of a politician he was. Like that was the thing. It's like no one thought he would be the good politician. They thought his brother would,
Yeah.
but he just like surprised everyone. He's like good at it, legitimately. Like he made like good eye contact and like talked well to people. And they have these televised debates against Nixon, and he just like crushes it because his dad was like,
knew all the camera stuff.
yeah, it's just like crafted his fucking image to do this. So it's like his dad is like this 30-year visionary for how this technology would play out and how power dynamics would play out, and ends up doing it. And Kennedy, and it's kind of interesting, right? So like they're Irish Catholics, and the Protestants like are not gonna fucking vote for him, which is like really interesting. That like now you just think like you hear this term like Christian like in the media, but like it doesn't mean anything because like Catholics and Protestants hated each other like all
Yeah.
throughout like history. And like the idea of grouping them together as like one group is like almost like nonsensical.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um, but he ends up getting less of the Irish Catholic vote than he thought he would, and the reason he wins is he does better with like blacks and like Protestants than he thought that he would. Which is like really interesting also because I guess like the Pope not supporting him or something like probably made a dent in whatever it was. But anyway, he wins a very, very close election against Nixon. It's like down to the fucking wire, and he wins. And it's like this cool story of like, because like back then they didn't like count the votes on the same day. Like you had to wait like 24 hours or something to know who won the election.
Oh yeah, there's this crazy, crazy story in the Years of Lyndon Johnson book about how there was this game that people would play with elections in Texas that the counties that they had locked up, they would try and report them last. So then, like, you would say,
You
like,
just come
what's
out
your
the-
total? And then
Yeah.
they would, like, one up your total. So, like, when Lyndon Johnson won his Senate seat, he won by, like, 3 votes. And it's just so sketchy. And it's just like he blatantly stole this election. And then Robert Caro, it's so awesome. Like, in this book, he's talking about, like, the story of, like, how they stole the election. And he was just, like, he moved to Texas to write the book. And he was just, like, talking with the guy who organized the thing. And he knew he organized it. And he's like, dude, you're so old. Just tell me the story. Because if you don't tell it to me, then no one's going to know your totally
Yeah.
badass story.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
the guy just pulls over the car and just tells him the whole story.
That's amazing.
It's so
Yeah,
good,
well, so there's theories that there was some shady shit that went down in the 1960 election,
completely.
like Chicago, like his dad. Oh yeah, because his dad fucking owns Merchandise Mart. Holy shit! Have you ever hung out in Chicago?
No.
So there's this massive fucking complex called Merchandise Mart, like right on the. It's massive. Joseph P. Kennedy fucking owned it. He like bought it like in his Wall Street days, and like he sold it in the night. Like it was finally sold in the 90s for like a 30x appreciation or whatever. But he owned Merchandise Mart and has all this like
I think I
investment.
remember a story about that.
He
in
has
the book.
all this fucking investment in Chicago, and like the mob was like doing some mob like stuff during this election, and like he wins Illinois by like a couple votes. Like it's there's some like real shady shit that went down apparently. But anyway, he wins, and like they don't know like what's gonna happen, and then like like just one time like while they're trying to figure out the election results, they just see like the Secret Service like pull up to their house. And they're like, you're now under the protection of the Secret Service as like the president-elect of the United States. It's just like, oh shit. And then like Nixon won't like won't like.
Oh yeah.
He like won't admit that he
Like
lost.
Hillary Clinton.
Yeah. He like just doesn't show up to like give his concession speech or whatever. And like it's just so badass that like, all right, well we had some hiccups, but like now we've got like the president of the United States. It's pretty crazy. So he succeeds in that regard with his empire, but. Like the first year after JFK, he like has a stroke.
He had like a massive stroke and he can't talk, right?
Yeah, and then oh my God, this is so crazy. So he has a stroke as JFK is like now JFK is the president. He has a stroke that like leaves him paralyzed and he like can't talk, but he can like still like have all of his cognitive functions and like read the news and understand it. And like kind of walk around.
Yeah.
So you have this scene as like he's like the fucking Godfather or something where he's in his bed surrounded by his like minions of his Kennedy family because like now Bobby's married and John F. Kennedy's married and they're having kids and stuff like that. And he's just like bedridden and like people will come to him and like kiss his ring and be like, here's the news of the day. Do you like this? And he can like say like yes and no. And that's like it. He's like a binary.
And like blink.
Yeah. He's like but like he's like the dad of the president of the United States. He's like the most powerful person in the world and he can't speak.
I know.
It's just crazy. Like some fucking thing out of a movie.
Yeah. That's so insane.
And
then he gets the news that his son is killed.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so he's still alive when JFK is assassinated.
Yeah. And then people, they were like saying about how they told him the news and his eyes were just like bugging out of his head. Or he heard it on the TV before they told him or something like that.
Yeah, they said, no, so Ted Kennedy is the one that tells him, but like they just like turn off his TV and like it's broken, you can't watch it.
Oh, yeah.
And he's like freaking out. Like,
because he knows some weird shit is up. Yeah.
And then like Ted Kennedy like finally tells him. Jesus.
Which is 2 of his kids. Oh my God.
Well, it's 3rd because Kathleen's already dead.
Yeah.
And like one's retarded. So he's like, 4. He's like, down to 5.
I know, exactly. Yeah. Is he alive for Robert's assassination?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Jesus,
so
man.
insane.
So yeah, then like obviously like RFK like is gonna make a run for president and he's assassinated.
Who also is hated by Lyndon Johnson.
RFK also? Yeah, but like how crazy is this? It's like, all right, he lost 2 of his sons, but he's still got one in play for the president and he's assassinated.
I know.
While he's alive. Jesus, man. It's like
Sounds
it's fucking Greek tragedy.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
oh my God, because he was the attorney general under JFK, and yeah, and it's actually fucking really interesting that he was the attorney general under JFK because like so much crazy shit happens under JFK, like the Cuban Missile Crisis,
Oh yeah.
and it's like all of his like fucking military personnel are like scheming to like undermine him and do this crazy politics where they're gonna like start World War III and shit, and like RFK is like the only person he can trust, and it's like actually smart that he appointed him, and he appointed him specifically because he's like you're the only person I can trust like in Washington, which I also think is smart,
Yeah,
like when you have like families like this that are like really really tight with each other.
definitely.
Um, and then like I don't know, I guess like Ted Kennedy has this like crazy shit happen with like he like drives a girl off a bridge and kills her.
He did. I don't remember that. But
Yeah, it's
could
not.
be.
I don't think it's in the books. I think he's dead at this point. But
Mm-hmm.
I know that that's like another thing that's gonna happen. And like, it was possible that Ted Kennedy could have become president also if like he didn't murder someone, but he
Oh
like
my
blatantly
God.
murdered someone. So like, he was like driving like wasted on
Yeah,
a
yeah,
bridge
yeah.
and like drove off the bridge and killed a girl. And then like she was like in the car drowning and he like
Oh
didn't go to
yeah.
save her.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
They
I
like
heard
made
about
it.
this.
They made like a Netflix movie about it that I want to watch.
Huh.
Yeah.
Cool.
Um, so like the family like kind of like ends in like dismay and like cursed like thing.
Yeah.
But God, what an interesting story.
Yeah. Really crazy and interesting book. He, I think, is one of the paragons of American badasses in the pantheon that I have of like Andrew Carnegie, Lyndon Johnson, John D. Rockefeller, and like I don't know, all these dudes.
Or like power people because there's a lot of American badasses, but
Yeah, but I just consider these guys like my own personal
yeah,
like American badasses, you know?
I gotcha. Yeah, there's also like there's some stuff at the end of his life with like Joseph McCarthy that I think is kind of
Oh
interesting
yeah, they
too.
loved
Yeah,
McCarthy, who was
'cause he's
also
Irish
Catholic.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's
yeah,
like an Irish Catholic also. So they couldn't denounce him
yeah,
because they're like, yeah, we got kind of stick with the Irish Catholics.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Which like, oh man, yeah, oh man, what other? There's so many anecdotes in this book that I thought were interesting.
yeah.
but,
It's full of interesting shit.
yeah,
This is a great
but
book.
what a crazy life.
Yeah.
All right, do you want to do conspiracy?
Yeah, sure.
All right, so the other book we're thinking about talking about is Conspiracy by Ryan Holiday.
Yeah,
And this is
another superlative story.
What do you mean superlative story? Oh,
Just epic, like really good. I
Oh,
really
yeah,
liked
yeah.
it a lot. Yeah.
yeah. So this is a story. It came out this year. It's about the Peter Thiel, Hulk Hogan, Gawker trial, and scheme.
Yeah, or it's just what I think it's about more generally, which is just fascinating, is that everyone thinks, so Ryan Holiday describes, that in our modern age, it's impossible to pull off a real conspiracy because, oh, everything is so transparent and blah, blah, blah. And that he just gets into the dynamics of it because Ryan Holiday is what I would consider to be a really dope historian and classicist who just like learns all of this awesome stuff from history and then just can contextualize it to our modern age and like yield insights that are just really interesting. So like he's like, okay, well that hypothesis that it's impossible to have like a conspiracy theory. Also, conspiracy theories these days are like a joke. It's like, oh yeah, like aliens are like blah 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 blah, and like you read all this crazy shit on whatever the internet. But like he's like, okay, dig it. I'm gonna describe a real conspiracy that actually went down. And he's like, okay, let's define conspiracy. It's like when a bunch of people like get together and then they just like hatch some plans, like affect some crazy change, and like they don't tell anybody about
Yeah.
it, and then they just carry that out and execute it.
Yeah.
And like gets into all this crazy stuff of like the art of war and all this kind of thing, like you know what I mean? When you should resort to a conspiracy and when not, and like, oh, Machiavelli, that's what he gets
Yeah.
in. So Ryan Holiday's super into Machiavelli, obviously, and then like, yeah, it's just
Yeah,
fascinating.
It
Like,
starts in the really abstract sense of like talking about the idea of conspiracies and like from this philosophical sense. And then it's like, yo, let's look at a real fucking example of like Peter Thiel, one guy destroying a media company, like without anyone knowing. Like,
amazing.
yeah, it is crazy. And it's also like, okay, the characters in this story are great. Like, so Nick Denton, the guy that runs Gawker, is fucking amazing, just like as a character. And like AJ Delorio, the guy that's gonna like write the the Hulk Hogan story, is great. Hulk Hogan's great because it's fucking Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
And like Peter Thiel is obviously amazing. So it's like, man, the characters are good. And it's also, I think it's interesting that like they're both gay, which is like,
yes, that's
it's
interesting.
so fascinating.
And then this
Yeah.
also is like one of the major drivers of like the conflict between them too.
Yeah,
It's like this town's not big enough for the both of us.
Yeah, they understand each other too well.
Yeah, exactly.
So anyway, so I guess the context of the story is that Peter Thiel is obviously a super famous and well-known Silicon Valley investor. So he started PayPal, made his first $1 billion from that, and then gave the first check to Mark Zuckerberg for Facebook, which was like 250K at the time. That like 100x or whatever. It's just like worth like $250 million, probably more, upwards of that now. And he used this to like put a bunch of other investments that have all done really well. And he started his own venture fund. And he's also like kind of like a weird venture capitalist. Like, 'cause he has this thing called like the Thiel Fellowship, where he like pays smart kids not to go to college to.
Epic troll.
Yeah,
He's just awesome and is like a great, in my opinion, thought leader and just like person who has very interesting ideas.
Yeah.
I just love watching his speeches and
yeah,
like
he's a good character for Silicon Valley and tech, and he is gay, and I think okay, I've heard some funny stories about this. I have no idea whatsoever if there's any truth to him at all, but like Freddie like didn't start gay, and like he kind of did this as like a rationalist experiment where after he sold PayPal, he's like really rich and just like not knowing what to do with his life, and he's like, well, how do people become happy? He's like, oh, like they have a lot of sex. Like people that have more sex are happier. He's like, who has a lot of sex? Like gay guys. So I wonder if I was just like gay, if that would make me like happier. And then he like tried it and it's like, yeah, kind of works. Now I'm gay.
Huh. Interesting.
I've heard this as like a rumor, but I have no idea if there's any truth to it.
Who knows? I also think it's interesting that he was born in Germany because he speaks perfect English. You would literally never know.
How long did he live in Germany for?
I don't know, but he was born in Frankfurt.
Yeah. He's like, he's not like technically an American citizen, right? Or I guess I'm sure he's a citizen now, but he's not like a natural born American.
I don't know,
like he couldn't be president legally. I just know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But like Nicholas Taleb like is like virtue signaling about how he's a U.S. citizen, blah blah blah. But maybe Peter Thiel is too smart for that and he doesn't pay U.S. taxes or something. Yeah.
Something. But anyway, Peter Thiel is in the closet at the time, like whatever reason that he's gay,
or like not exactly, but like he's just like not well known. Like some people know, but it's not like a big thing or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, because he doesn't want. So he was one of the ideas that they were saying in the book is that he wants to be seen as the best investor of his generation. He doesn't want to see as the best gay investor of his generation.
He doesn't want that qualifier.
Yeah.
He just like doesn't want it to be a thing. He just wants to stand on his own merit, and for some reason, like I don't know, like AJ Delorio is like covering the beat for Gawker that is on Silicon Valley.
Yeah, Valleywag it's called.
Yeah, it's like one of those subset of the Gawker like family of they had all these blogs and they would just like post things like at will with like out any reservation whatsoever.
It also should be said that Nick Denton is like himself. You could say, I mean, like it's pretty obvious. He's a pretty cool, badass dude. He like started a goddamn media empire by himself. That's fucking sick. And like.
And they like had some legitimate takedowns and like legitimate scoops and like they would post the things that no one else would post, but like were still interesting.
Exactly.
Like,
he was like taking like a new platform.
Yeah,
like
he's
he
recognized
recognized
like the Matt Drudge or something.
Yeah, exactly. And he pioneered like the clicks, or like he pioneered this crazy stupid metric that like the more clicks you got on your thing,
the more revenue you could get.
Yeah. And then he like put it up in the office so that all the journalists and like bloggers would just be like going crazy. We were literally just talking about this. That like so Joseph Patrick Kennedy had like erudite like Harvard like you know what I mean Ivy League dudes who were like writing his editorials and stuff and now it's just like a bunch of just I don't know
drunk
vampires
guys that are like coked out like just writing things for the clicks
for the clicks.
But anyway AJ Delorio is one of the writers for Gawker writes a story that basically outs Peter Thiel as gay. It's just like, hey, Peter Thiel is gay and like these are the stories about it. And he just thinks it's like doing Gawker thing of like we're just doing gossip of Silicon Valley. But Peter Thiel is fucking infuriated that this stupid website just like did something that was not under his control. And like now it's just out there that he's gay and like everyone's talking about it. And he just like, I don't know, you just imagine him like just like in a room like darkened with like no lights on, just like thinking. And I guess he just like makes it known. He's like, I despise this company and
or like he tries to like, wasn't it like the Barbra Streisand effect? He like tries to fuck with them, but then they just start fucking with him more or something like that.
And it's like he like every single person he talks to like basically tells him like there's nothing you can do about it. Like they're like a media company. They live on outrage. Like you roll in the mud with pigs, the pig always wins. And like for like 4 years, he just like broods about it and just like comes to the conclusion that there's like probably not anything he can do about it. And this is so fucking interesting in this story. So like Peter Thiel like just like has this network, I guess, of like smart like 18-year-olds, which I also think is really interesting because I try to do this to the best of my ability also, which is just have like smart 18-year-olds that like you like add value to in whatever way you can, like, hey, you can crash at my place, or like, hey, like, let's like hack on something, or I can give you guidance or business advice or whatever. Because you just like learn so much about like what ambitious like young people are doing. This is like
Mm.
Y Combinator's big insight too, that you could just like fund these people and like they will start like badass companies. Um, but anyway, he just like has this network and he's like flying around the country like meeting with them. And like one of these guys who is like he's called Mr. A in the book, but he's not like given it a full name, just like comes up to Peter Thiel and he's like, Peter, I know that you hate Gawker. I have an idea about something we can do about it. And it's like a fucking like 18-year-old or something. Or maybe he's like slightly older. But
whatever.
and he's just like, think about it,
Amazing
you're like
idea.
talking to like this billionaire, you know, and you're just like, I know that there's this thing that you hate, and I have an idea, and it's like to use the to weaponize the legal system against Gawker, and like I think that you could probably find somebody like Gawker has never gone to trial over anything they've published.
Oh yeah, because they had, it's like this First Amendment in the United States is like really, really strong defense
Yeah.
against like getting sued out of existence, and they were always hiding behind this.
Yeah, and they also only publish things that are true. Like even if it's like, oh, you cheated on your wife, like if it's true, it's like really hard to say it's like defamation, I guess. Even if like they don't want you to publish this or something. But he thinks that like they can find the someone that Gawker screwed over and like basically take them to trial and win a decision against them. And the idea is that like Gawker has never been to trial because they can just outfund anyone because they're a massive media company and the people that they are
And
like
they have a huge insurance policy. They're
Yeah.
not actually a huge, massive media company. They're like pretty scrappy as media companies
Yeah.
go.
well compared to like a normal person, they've
Yeah,
got a lot
yeah.
more assets and also like they don't like no one wants to be dragged through the mud like this.
Yeah,
Like,
and they know that if they did sue them, they would just drag
Yeah.
them through the mud the entire
they would
time.
drag them all their gossip, like put
Yeah,
all
yeah,
their like
yeah.
research people on it. So like it just never happened. But he like has this idea
Like
that
Fred Durst. I know that Fred Durst like
yeah,
tried
yeah.
to.
like of like Limp Bizkit, right? He's
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the
yeah.
lead singer of Limp Bizkit, like got dragged for like a week trying to sue them,
And just
then, like,
gave up
gave
immediately,
He's
said
like, "Fuck
uncle,
it.
like,
I
as soon
can't-
as
I can't do
possible."
this. Yeah. But he like thinks he can do this, and this is such an interesting.
No, it's
part.
because they destroyed his life. They destroyed Hulk Hogan's life.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
like,
oh, yeah, yeah. But I was saying the Mr. A guy.
Oh yeah.
Like I think this is just so interesting that there's this one guy that just kind of says, "Look, I'm just gonna be like ambitious as fuck and tell Peter Thiel that just give me like $20 million and I think I can destroy Gawker, or like I have ideas about how it could be done." And like the way he says it is like so convincing that Peter is just like, "All right, fine," which is so like he just like at a dinner. Like
Yeah.
just says, "All right, I'm gonna give you like whatever $20 million. Go to help me destroy Gawker."
Yeah, but so this is also fascinating to me because people in the United States all the time like to get down on, for instance, Russian oligarchs who just buy media companies and shut them down, like according to their whim. And so this is just blatantly a story of an American oligarch who has a media company that he doesn't like, and he just sues it out of existence legally through the legal system. It's like, okay, what is the difference between this and like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it definitely raises a lot of questions that I think are really interesting. The story goes Hulk Hogan so Hulk Hogan's like a fucking famous wrestler that his wife divorces him, and
Yeah.
like his wife divorces him, and then once he's like divorced, he like has sex with like a friend of his.
best friend's
Oh,
wife, and then his
so
best
fucking
friend
weird.
records it.
Yeah, it's so weird. It's like his best friend's wife seduces him and like he fucks her, but like they're secretly recording it. And it's just this really weird thing that he does it like as he's like super depressed as his like wife fucks him and like his wife left him and because like it's such a weird fucking story. And then like they try to blackmail him with the tape apparently.
Yeah, they also get him saying a lot of racist things on the tape, which
Yeah.
destroys his reputation.
Which is
and-
also stupid.
Yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
God. You know this like Donald Sterling thing that happened in the NBA? This was like a big scandal a while ago where Donald Sterling was the owner of the Los Angeles Clippers and he had a girlfriend, like he's like 80 and his girlfriend's like 20, right? He's like it's fucking gold digger or whatever, but she got him really, really drunk and then he said a bunch of racist shit like while she was secretly recording it.
Mm.
And then she like published it online and it was a massive fucking scandal. And he had his team forcibly taken away from him by the NBA because of this video clip. Oh, but it's such an interesting story, right? Because it's like, I think that this was wrong, by the way. Like, I don't think that they should have taken the team away from Donald Sterling, but it's just so interesting that like you can just like get someone drunk and like get them emotional and then like secretly record them and destroy their life.
Yeah.
It's like very fascinating like concept. But anyway, this video somehow makes its way to like TMZ.
If
Of
your
the
life
se-
is fragile, I like Nicholas Taleb's idea of anti-fragile.
Oh, interesting.
You know what I
So like
mean?
if you're so leveraged on your reputation that you can't afford.
Yeah, if you're anti-fragile,
Yeah.
then stuff like that happens to you, and then it's good for you.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I'm trying to think of like an example of that where like someone had this like maybe Trump to an extent,
Yeah,
but
for instance.
yeah, like makes people like him more that the media is
Yeah,
going
yeah,
so
yeah.
far after him.
Literally that
Yeah.
happened. Trump is anti-fragile.
Yeah, it's like no matter what they do, it'll just like look like yeah, he's like so leveraged on like just people being out to get him that no matter what happens, it'll look like you're out to get him and it'll just get stronger.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like look at them trying to take him down because they're afraid. It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
you know, like you can't do anything.
Or Nicholas Taleb was saying, like, for writers have really anti-fragile jobs because it's like if he has some interview and then he just punches the host in the face, then he'll sell more books. But like if you're like a software engineer and you go to work and punch your boss in the face, then
Yeah.
you will lose your job. Your job is fragile.
Yeah, that's really funny. But I guess how does this video get to Gawker? I don't remember, but like somehow like
Yeah,
this guy
somehow they
tries
find
to
it.
sell this fucking blackmail video of Hulk Hogan on the black market, and like it just gets its way to like TMZ, and they're like TMZ is like we're not gonna publish this or something because it's like a sex tape of Hulk Hogan, and he's saying all this racist shit. But Gawker just fucking publishes it, and Hulk Hogan like says he's gonna sue them, and
Wait, so just to interject, I looked for a really long time for this video, and I couldn't find it.
that's very interesting.
Did you?
No, I never looked at it.
You did. You read the whole book and you didn't look for the video.
No, you could just get it on Pirate
Insane.
Bay. How
No,
is
you
this-
can't.
You can't get it on torrents.
I don't know.
Of course
Stay
you can.
tuned. We'll update it in the comments.
Yeah.
You can find the video. And if we find it, we'll post a link.
That is interesting though that you can't find it. I think it's interesting that you can't find
Yeah,
it.
I
That's
tried to find
that's
it.
relevant info. in my
Yeah.
opinion.
And if we find it, we'll post a link. So stay tuned.
All right, yeah, we will definitely post the link to the Hulk Hogan video. But Gawker publishes a sex tape, and it's like literally showing his dick and him like cheating on his like fucking wife, or I guess not cheating, but like just fucking his best friend's girl. And oh my god, it like destroys his life, and he's already at like a low. Like his life's like kind of falling apart. And you think about how many steroids this dude's taking in his life. It's just like not good. He decides to sue Gawker, and they're like, all right, roll out the countersuit like playbook. Let's drag him through the mud. Let's run his expenses dry. How much this guy got? Like Peter Thiel uses a line that I think is amazing, where he calls Hulk Hogan a single-digit millionaire. And like this was like controversial because he said this in like an interview where he's like, look, we have like media companies like ganging up on single digit millionaires like Hulk Hogan, and like like his mind is exactly like how he thinks of it. He's like, this is irrelevant, he's a single digit millionaire, how could he like, but like he just like so nonchalantly like dismissed this as like nothing. Like in his game of chess or whatever.
Yeah.
It was like, it was funny. This is why Peter Thiel can never be president, because he says shit like this. But like, anyway, Hulk Hogan's getting the Gawker counterplay book, but because this dude, Mr. A, has been scheming
Yeah, they don't know that actually his pockets are
for
run deep.
a moment like this.
Yeah.
And like through like this is where the conspiracy happens, where he goes to Peter Thiel, is like, Peter, I think I found something very interesting. This Hulk Hogan suit. He's like, perfect. This dude like fucking wants to kill Gawker. Yeah. Like they published a sex tape of him when they like didn't like blur out his dick or like anything. I feel like it's just like completely unnecessary.
Yeah.
There was not like they never asked.
He
his
has
permission.
nothing to lose. So it's like people
Yeah.
with nothing to lose are super dangerous because
Yeah, he has
you
nothing.
can't. Yeah.
And he like through like a fucking network, like they get like multiple lawyers as like intermediaries,
So
like
fascinating.
involved in this, like to shield the fact that Peter Thiel is like giving money.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
Peter
yeah.
Thiel's like giving money to a lawyer that doesn't know Peter Thiel is giving
Oh,
money. It's just like
exactly.
an
Yeah, yeah,
anonymous donor.
Some lawyer in LA, right?
Yeah, and then that guy is giving money to another lawyer. So it's just like everyone in the network, no one knows where the money's actually coming from.
Incredible.
They basically approach Hulk
Also,
Hogan.
it's so fascinating that Ryan Holiday went and interviewed all the people involved in this, including Peter Thiel. So
Yeah.
it's just like he's not making it up. It's actually happened.
Yeah, Peter Thiel and Nick Denton are just like, yeah, we'll talk. We'll give you, like, we'll
Yeah.
tell you what happened. Like, I don't know how he did this, but
He must just be just I don't know, like a really interesting dude to talk to or something like that. A good
Yeah.
listener. He's probably a good listener.
yeah, that's a great point. And I
Yeah.
think probably Peter Thiel wanted to tell this story.
Yeah, totally. Like
just
the
like-
Lyndon Johnson
yeah.
thing. It's like you want to tell people this
He's
story.
like, all right, this was kind of badass, so I do need to like have this
Yeah.
articulated.
But it actually kind of came out at the end of
Yeah.
the thing, which was bad for Peter Thiel, and then
Yeah.
made him look like an ass. And
Yeah. But anyway, so he starts this network to fund the Hulk Hogan lawsuit, and Hulk Hogan's like, someone's like, hey, if you take this to court, we'll just pay for everything and we'll destroy Gawker. And he's like, I'm listening. And he goes on like this crazy charade of like he's like involved with like an FBI sting trying to like catch the people
Oh yeah.
that did this, and
Which makes him look even stupider.
Gawker is like, they get like deposed by like the lawyers in this case, and it's like hilarious because they're just so
Oh
nonchalant.
yeah. AJ Delorio, what an idiot.
There's like questioning in the deposition where they're like, "Would you ever not publish a sex tape?" And they're like, "No."
Oh
And they're like, "What if it was a
God.
kid?" And he's like, "How young?" And they're like, "4." He's like, "No, we would publish it." And
Oh
it's just
yeah,
like,
because he was trolling them because he
Yeah.
thought that he was like
He's
hiding
like-
behind this First Amendment stuff.
yeah, and it's like, this is so stupid. Like,
Actually, he's the person that got screwed the most in this entire thing.
Yeah.
Because he was broke, and like Peter Thiel was like suing him, and so or like kind of suing him, and then he's like losing all his like apartment and ramen. This is just like a dude who's like a blogger. He makes like
Yeah.
I don't know $50,000 a year living in some apartment in like wherever.
yeah, Manhattan probably, yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, so
'Cause that's where the office was. But
yeah.
so yeah, he does this, and they go to court, and like they actually have this trial, and it really freaks the fuck out of Gawker because they don't understand what's happening. It's like, we've broken everyone that's tried to sue us, and this guy keeps coming at us. Where is he getting this money from? Like, how is he so determined? How are they outmaneuvering us? Like, it's crazy. Like, they find a way to sue them, like in Tampa, like this weird city in Florida where Hulk Hogan's from. And there's only like 2 mock jury companies in that city. And like Peter Thiel just buys both of them. So like Gawker can't use them. And there's like others, they do like crazy like jury like analysis where they determine that like a fat woman would be like the best juror because they're like really self-conscious about their bodies and would like feel like someone like doing the sex tape and exposing you would just like, they would resonate. And they get like somehow like 3 fat women onto the jury. Like, they just like completely manipulate this entire court process to like be in their favor. Even though like I think like most legal experts didn't think that Gawker would lose, like when the trial was happening.
Who knows?
I remember listening to a podcast with Nick Denton on like, I think it was Jason Calacanis' podcast, like while the trial was going on, and they didn't think that they were going to lose. And this before anyone even knew Peter Thiel was involved, which is pretty interesting.
You have to like posture though, I think, all the time, you know, because you don't want to make it seem like you think you're going to lose.
Yeah, and I think this is like the part of the book where he's like, well, the thing about conspiracies, like, even if no one thinks they work, they might, you know, like,
Yeah, but also it's like hubris because Nick Denton thought that he was like untouchable, and that's part of the whole thing of his epic
image.
demise.
Yeah, and they have this trial, and Gawker loses. It's found like, I don't know what they technically lose for, like libel or some, or maybe not libel, but just like,
I don't know.
damn it, like this is a civil court, I guess, so it's not like criminal charges, but it's that they like performed like legit damage to Hulk Hogan, recklessly publishing this sex tape and not taking it down. Oh my God, they didn't take it down when like they were demanded to take it down either. And they win enough of a decision where Gawker will mean the bankruptcy of Gawker.
Yeah, and AJ Delorio.
Yeah, and AJ Delorio person. And it's so interesting that like, I don't think like Peter Thiel even knew that's what was going to happen, but he's just kind of thinking like, wow, that worked out.
Yeah. Amazing.
Oh, bankruptcy.
But then it's somehow they let it slip that Peter Thiel was involved, and then it worked out really bad for him.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's like, so apparently they pull this off, and Gawker dies, and like Peter Thiel has done this amazing thing of like secretly funding a lawsuit that like killed one of his enemies from like 5 years he's had this enemy or something. And he just like wants to talk about it with people, where he's just like starts slipping in hints to his like friends, like, yo, did you see that Gawker thing? It's pretty cool, right? And they'll be like, oh yeah, no, it's like a First Amendment thing. It's like, yeah, but it's pretty cool that like they got like, you know, like like he just like can't like hold his mouth shut. And like one of his friends, like, it's a little weird that, you know, Peter Thiel like keeps talking about this, and then he like sees this dude like Mr. A, that's the guy that like was involved with like working with all the lawyers, like post a Facebook picture from like Tampa, Florida. He's like, wait, isn't that where the Hulk Hogan case was?
Yeah.
It's like, you don't think Pete? Oh yeah, he definitely did this. Like, and it kind of like just like comes out where like his friends like figure it out, but like he wasn't exactly hiding it. And then it became like a huge issue where people are wondering whether or not this was good for society. I guess. I don't know. It's kind of, I don't know. What are your ultimate thoughts on just like the overall story? Like, do you think that what he did was good or bad? Like, do you have an opinion?
So, okay, this is my general philosophy on phenomena that happen in the world, is that I don't ever consider things that happen to be good or bad, or like, at least I really try not to. I read this book when I was in college called Beyond Good and Evil by Nietzsche, and I always just really liked it, and I just really like that idea that it's like, okay, so the grass is green and the sky is blue, And I just like recognize those facts and just try and live my best life with green grass and blue sky. And I just don't like sit around getting pissed off that like the grass isn't like blue and the sky green. Like, oh my God, why is the sky not green and the grass blue? I'm so pissed off about this all the time. Ugh. So like, okay, Peter Thiel like destroyed Gawker. It's just like a thing that happened. And so like, I don't give it like a try at least, not to give it a good or bad judgment, but I don't know. Like, I like Peter Thiel. I think he's interesting, but also I just think it's interesting. Okay, so what my main takeaway from this is that, okay, so German billionaire destroys like media company. It sounds like something that happens in Russia, but actually it happened in America. So it's just like America is just as crazy and lawless and just insane of a country as any other country in the world, if not more so. And like, this is just a great example of that.
We just put a suit on it or something.
Yeah,
We dress it up better.
Yeah.
We just used a court system instead of like a gun.
Yeah. Which is literally
probably better, honestly.
No, but honestly, the state is like, so the court system is just like a little velvet glove over guns. Because like the state is like the monopoly on the use of force and the use of guns. And like the court is just like the
extension of the state or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, maybe. It I think that even like everyone that I follow, like on all sides of the spectrum, like are kind of mixed about this decision. Like there's not a clear cut or clear consensus view on whether or not it was a positive or negative thing. It was just like an interesting plot point that happened. And the book, I think, talks about like not only was the case itself interesting and like for what it means for free speech or the restrictions on free speech that should exist in like this digital age or whatever, but the actual like fact that he pulled off this conspiracy is really incredible.
Yeah, it's true.
And it's just like, I think Ryan Holiday thinks like people should do it more.
Yeah, it's inspiring.
Yeah.
If I have like one word to like, if I have to say one word about this book, it's inspirational.
I think it is too. And I think it's because there's a lot of pieces to like getting results in the world, but like you have to like obviously like learn and like understand the world, and then you have to compile it correctly and then find out a trajectory that's interesting or like worth pursuing, and like have the right pieces in the right place. But then you also like have to act on it. And that's a thing that I get hung up on a lot is like I don't like actually take that step into the world that's like, hey, I hate X. Instead of just saying that, like actually doing something about it is the thing that I think a lot of people lack. But for whatever reason, he didn't lack that. He thought, I'm going to actually do something about this. Yeah, I'm going to actually like go after Gawker.
And this is a kind of leitmotif of the book too. People like rail against the world and they think, oh, things are bad, whatever. And that's an interesting thing too. I remember how Mr. A was selling it to Peter Thiel. He was like, yeah, so you don't like Gawker and like they're destroying all this stuff. They're bad for the world. And like you think you can't do anything about it. But what would the world be like if everyone thought that they couldn't do anything about the things that annoy them about the world? Yeah. The world would suck. So are you just going to sit by and let the world suck? Or are you going to do something about it? Because you can do something about it.
Yeah.
And then it's just like, boom. Yeah, I will do something about it. Fuck Gawker.
Here's $10 million. It really is an amazing story. It's awesome. And it kind of is on the same theme as the Joe Kennedy book about just like power structures in the U.S.
And then also, so it's like a startup or a successful business is like a conspiracy too. It's like you and a bunch of people just doing a thing. Or just any kind of project that you do, like a cooperative endeavor with a bunch of other humans, can be thought of in some similar terms.
Well, they're definitely schemes, but there's schemes that are acted upon. And
yeah, sure. Yeah. In that sense, they're the same.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. All right. Any other thoughts about the book before we finish up?
Not particularly.
No, I think that was pretty good coverage on those two things. We're going to Puerto Rico next weekend. Or this weekend, which would be dope. Yep. So we'll have some stories to tell about that when we come back. And
about Crypto Rico
and the crypto colonization that's happening there, and talk about Hunter S. Thompson.
Yes, Rum Diary.
What he thought about Puerto Rico also. So it should be good. All right, Perfect. Cool. Thanks for listening.
Yep.
Peace.
Good night and good luck.